By 1969, the Stones had begun the transition from blues revivalists to rock pioneers. They'd relied on Brian Jones in their early years to elevate their arrangements. His use of instruments had created a full, rich sound, but over the years he began to deteriorate. Mick and Keith saw this and made big changes. They brought in session musicians to basically take on Brian's job of creating a full sound out of their records. Eventually, they replaced him completely with Mick Taylor. Mick and Keith were pushing forward and not looking back. The lyric they'd wrote years before could be none more true than now in 1969. Yesterday don't matter if it's gone. By the time their next album would be released, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin would all have joined Brian Jones in the club of musicians to die at 27. This time, the Beatles released their farewell album Let It Be. It of course topped the charts in the UK and US, but it received mixed reviews. Some praised the stripped down style of a live album, others critiqued the production. Black Sabbath's self-titled album debuted in February of 1970. Regarded as the first true heavy metal album, it featured groundbreaking riffs and menacing themes. It marked the beginning of a new era in rock and metal. The Doors, in an attempt to reconnect with their audience, released Morrison Hotel. Their last album had been their worst selling to date. Now they returned to their blues roots. It was a success and seen as a return to form. The group regained both critical and commercial acclaim. The Stones' Hyde Park concert had showcased a new style to the Sound's live performance. The free concert had been a massive success, better than they could have imagined. They now plan to follow it up with another free concert. It would be held in the Altamont Freeway in California. They'd make a catastrophic decision to hire Hell's Angels as their security. Violence would erupt. They'd find themselves right in the middle, with both Mick and Keith desperately trying to restore order. They'd branch out from Olympic Studios, recording in Muscle Shoals, Trident, and a mobile studio parked outside Mick's house. Mick's relationship with Marriane Faithful would finally come to an end. Alan Klein would finally be fired from the Stones, and reminiscent of Brian, Keith would start missing recording sessions. This is the story of the Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers.
Sisters, brothers and sisters, everybody be cool now, come on. We always happens, something very funny happens when we start that number.
What a thing to get 100,000 people in the park and just generate the idea of peace and love.
By the time the Rolling Stones had performed at Hyde Park, Marriane Faithful had begun divorce proceedings with her husband John Dunbar. Dunbar was not going to take this lying down. He retaliated, citing her adultery with Mick. The newspaper headline read, "Marriane wasn't faithful." The publicity was causing Marriane a lot of stress. That, and she was also withdrawing from heroin. While at the Hyde Park concert, she detoxed in the guests' enclosure. Soon after, she left England with Mick. They landed in Sydney, Australia, and Mick began filming for Ned Kelly. A biographic Australian-English film, the story follows a poverty-stricken farmer who turns to a life of crime. The Australian public were outraged their outlaw hero was being played by Mick Jagger. While in Sydney, Marriane attempted to take her own life, overdosing on sleeping pills. As a result, she slips into a coma for 6 days. The whole time, Mick is by her hospital bedside. Marriane, at this time, was just 23 years old. Her mother came to the hospital to see her, and when doctors told her she may not pull through, Marianne's mother contacted a Catholic priest to perform the last rites. While Marriane lay in a coma, Brian Jones' funeral took place on July 10th. Neither Mick, Keith, Andrew Oldham or Alan Klein were in attendance. Bill and Charlie were in attendance to pay their last respects. Mick and Keith sent wreaths. Eventually, Marriane woke up from her coma to the voices of Mick, her mother and her son. When she came to, Mick declared, "You've come back." Marriane replied, "Wild horses wouldn't drag me away." Meanwhile, in Australia, Mick was having a miserable time shooting Ned Kelly. The script seemed to be only half written. Due to her hospitalisation, Marriane Faithful's part had been given to Diane Craig. As Mick wrote Marriane letters from the set, he also wrote Marsha Hunt letters. an actress he was now having an affair with. While Mick continues shooting and Keith awaits the birth of his son, a group of hippies invade a property at 10050 Cielo Drive in California. In the house, a group of 5, including actress Sharon Tate, are all slaughtered. The following night, the leader, who'd orchestrated the killings, leads the group to a home in Hollywood where a couple's home is invaded and they too are slaughtered. On the 10th of August, Keith's first child, Marlin, is born. 8 days later, Mick is wounded by a gunshot to his hand on the filming of Ned Kelly. The prop gun apparently had backfired. Meanwhile, on the 15th of August, 500 people gather on a dairy farm for the Woodstock Festival. 32 acts play, including Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, The Grateful Dead, and The Who. Though the 3-day festival is racked with rain, minimal food, and lots of mud, it's a euphoric experience. After Marriane is discharged from the hospital, she joins Mick in Australia. When filming for Ned Kelly wrapped, the two headed back to England. On arriving back, Marriane finds Keith racked with guilt over Brian's death. The only thing keeping them together was the fact that they had a newborn son to support. Though their personal lives were in turmoil, the Rolling Stones single Honky Tonk Women had hit #1 in the UK. Despite this, they were having money issues. Ironically, they were forking over most of their hard-earned cash to pay income tax. Mick decided to contact a merchant banker. The man looked through all their earnings and concluded they'd soon be broke. He suggested 2 things. 1, their tax issues, their best option was to leave the UK. And 2, it was imperative they get out of their contract with Alan Klein immediately. To quickly claw back some cash, the Stones now embarked on their largest ever US tour. It would start in Colorado and end with a free concert in California. The group were racked with anxiety. Their last performance, though successful, to them, musically, was a disaster. They all knew how badly they played. The fact the audience didn't had saved them. As the tour went on sale, the public were quite outraged with the high price of tickets. The American tour certainly was not cheap by any standard. Before it began, one crucial decision was made by Mick. Alan Klein would have no part of the tour. Before it begins, Mick invites Marriane along. Sensing their relationship is doomed, she declines the offer. The group travelled to LA on October 17th. There, they rehearsed for the tour and continued mixing their album Let It Bleed. Mick and Keith stayed in California's famous Laurel Canyon. The two were aware the music scene had begun shifting to California, but California was vastly different to how it had been years earlier. Just days before they'd arrived, Charles Manson and some of his followers had been arrested for serial car theft. They soon would be tried for the killings in August. Areas like San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury were dangerous places. Even the Manson family steered clear of them. As the tour begins on December 7th, the Stones, to perpetuate their new image, before they hit the stage, are introduced as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. They also arranged to have their performances filmed. They were to be featured in a documentary with the intention of solidifying themselves as a driving force in rock music. As they go through the shows, it gives them the chance to fine-tune their act with Mick Taylor. While in LA, they were booked to perform 3 of their new songs on the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan, by this point, was more welcoming to the group. After their last performance, in which Mick and Bill rolled their eyes, having been made to change the lyrics of their single, Sullivan had banned them from the show. The ban had now been lifted. Sullivan's attitudes towards them had changed. He now insisted on shaking hands with Mick at the end of the performance. When the tour reaches Dallas, Mick gets word that Marriane is having an affair with Mario Schifano, the same man he'd apparently written the song Monkey Man about. The UK press report Marriane, Schifano and her son Nicholas have travelled to Rome. Mick, according to some, is in distress and phones her constantly, though the tour continues. While in Rome, Mario gifts Marriane a fur coat. Nicholas, her 5-year-old son, in loyalty to Mick, waits until the two are out the room and then throws the coat onto the open fire. Mick had been a father to Nicholas ever since he could remember. He loved and needed Mick. The gesture made Marriane realise how important Mick was to him, and should their relationship end, it could have a devastating effect on his life. The Stones play New York City's Madison Square Garden on November 26th. The performance is captured on film. It will be later released as a live album. The Stones will title Get Your Yayas Out. The tour wrapping up, a press conference is held where Mick announces the Stones will be doing a free concert on December 6th. According to some, it had come from the criticism from the press about them overcharging their fans. The free festival, Mick says, will set an example to the rest of America of how people should act in large groups. Before the live concert, the Stones begin recording some compositions for their next album. On December 2nd, the Stones decide to begin recording 3 tracks for their next album in Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama. The songs would then continue in Olympic Studios back in London. Beforehand, an engineer was sent over to ensure the place was of high standard. He reports back, despite the place being a shack in the middle of nowhere, the equipment is state of the art. The first song to be recorded is a cover of the blues gospel tune You Gotta Move. The story is a simple message to act, respond and not hesitate when the time comes. The old fearless blues mentality Keith Richards admired and implemented. The song was actually part of the Stones set list for their American tour. While going through it, they find it a little tricky at first. Mick and Keith were used to performing it as a duo. It took 19 takes before the arrangement sounded right. Keith plays his National Resonator in open D. Mick Taylor accompanies him playing electric rhythm on a Telecaster as well as adding slide. The second song the Stones begin in Muscle Shoals, Mick had wrote in Australia while filming Ned Kelly. Brown Sugar was a reference to both slavery and dun-coloured street heroin. It was Mick who'd even wrote the legendary riff on electric guitar. When he later presented the song to Keith, he was impressed. Keith later stated, "I'm the riff master, the only one I missed was Brown Sugar, Mick got that one." Keith did tidy up the riff a bit though, but Brown Sugar was totally Mick's song. He finished off the lyrics while at Muscle Shoals. He sat down in the studio and had the lyrics complete and ready to sing in 45 minutes. Keith plays the riff in open G using a Fender Telecaster. He also adds acoustic with his Gibson Hummingbird. Mick Taylor adds a solo on his Gibson SG in standard tuning. The solo would not feature on the record. The solo that can be heard was later added by Bobby Keys. When the song is worked on in later sessions, Keith is absent. This song is chosen to open Sticky Fingers. Finally, the third song they begin recording in Muscle Shoals is Wild Horses. There are different accounts as to who came up with the song. In her autobiography, Marriane Faithful claimed Mick had written the song about her. It documented Mick's feelings when he watched Marriane lying in a coma. The lyrics read, "I watch you suffer a dull aching pain, now you've decided to show me the same. No sweeping exit or off-stained lines could make me feel bitter or treat you unkind." Keith insists he'd written the song as a lullaby for his son Marlon. Either way, Mick had jotted down some of the lyrics to the song on a note that he left in his car. The car was broken into, and along with a few other items, the notepad was stolen. Mick hadn't memorised the lyrics, and instead of contacting the police, he put out a few newspaper diary stories saying, should the notepad be returned to him, he'd pay a reward with no questions asked. Below, he left a number to contact. Within a few hours, an anonymous caller contacted the number. He agreed to return it, but wanted £50. Mick countered, saying 30, and the man agreed. At the same time the Stones are recording their new songs, news breaks that Charles Manson and some of his followers have been arrested for the Tate murders. The mood across the nation is that of shock and fear. But before the Stones can return to England, they now have the matter of the free concert on the 6th of December. Originally, they planned it for San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Mick assumed they'd be able to use it, but when it came down to organising the event, the Stones were required to put down a $4 million bond. The idea was scrapped. Next, they settled on Sears Point Racetrack just off San Pablo Bay. But 48 hours before the concert was to begin, the owners decided they wanted a share of royalties from the documentary being filmed. The group was stuck. Just 24 hours before, they were phoned by the owner of the Altamont Raceway, a racetrack on 80 acres of land. It was settled. The Stones would play at Altamont. Billed as the Altamont Speedway Free Festival, their supporting acts would be names such as Crosby, Stills, Nash Young, Jefferson Airplane, and the Grateful Dead. From the get-go, the mood was sour. While the Grateful Dead were rehearsing, someone had written on a headboard, "First Annual Charles Manson Death Concert." It was in the air, not a good time to hold a festival. A catastrophic decision had also been made to recruit the Hells Angels as security. California's San Francisco chapter of the Hells Angels were a world away from those employed at Hyde Park. These were psychotic mountain men who followed no law but their own. By midday on the 6th of December, 300,000 people had gathered at Altamont Speedway. The quickest way to the stage, due to the traffic, was by foot or helicopter. When the Stones exited their helicopter, Mick was punched in the face by a crazed teenager high on acid. He'd shouted at Mick, "I hate you, I want to kill you." Mick, to his credit, insisted nothing happened to the boy. Mick then went to the Stones' trailer where he sat with Keith and Graham Parsons. They smoked marijuana and played country songs until the concert would begin. Meanwhile, violence was breaking out during the concert. When the Grateful Dead got word of this, they jumped back on the helicopter they came in and left. Jefferson Airplane took the stage, but fights with the Angels and the crowd broke out when one of their motorcycles was knocked over. The Angels retaliated by beating the audience. Singer Marty Balin jumped into the crowd to try and stop the fight, but was knocked out in the process. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young rushed through their set. At one point, Stephen Stills was stabbed with a bicycle spoke by a crazed Hells Angel. As their last song came to an end, Stills directed the band to run for the helicopter. Following that, the Stones were due to take the stage. As Bill Wyman was so late, it was dark before they even began. When the Stones set began, they managed to get through the first song, Jumping Jack Flash, okay. As they played Carol, pool cues began coming down on audience members' heads. It was not until Sympathy for the Devil the real problems began. During the song, a motorcycle blew up and all hell broke loose. An angel appeared to be kicking someone to death and the Stones halted their set. It seemed to stop the chaos momentarily. Mick even said, "Something funny always happens when we start that number." They attempted to cool down the mood, playing The Sun is Shining, a Jimmy Reed cover. By the time Stray Cat Blues was over, Mick was trying to get the audience to sit down before moving on to Under My Thumb. It was during this song the infamous murder occurred. An 18-year-old was brandishing a gun and making his way towards the stage. He was stabbed to death by an angel. During the chaos, the band stopped again and Keith began shouting into the mic. He stopped when he was informed someone had been approaching the stage with a gun. The Stones continued through their set. As the last song, Street Fighting Man, ended, they ran to their helicopter and made their escape. It was not until the group were back in their San Francisco hotel they found out about the murder. The next day, Keith was the first to head out of San Francisco and back to London. He was still high cocaine and drunk from whiskey. Anita Pallenberg greeted him at Heathrow. While Keith was touching down, Mick was asleep on a first-class trip to Switzerland. In his possession was all the money the Stones had earned from the American tour. The money was to be deposited into a Swiss bank account, and then Mick would head to the south of France where he'd purchase another home. The Stones were about to exile themselves from England. Tax had drove them out. When Mick flew from France to England, his first order of business was to confront Marriane and Mario. They were staying together in a cottage Mick had bought Marianne's mother. Mick drove there and had a blazing row with Mario. Mick and Marriane later went to bed together and Mario slept on the sofa. The next day, Marriane returned to Shaney Walk with Mick. At their London home, Mick played Marriane the finished mix of Wild Horses. Now while the Stones were back in England, they continued to record Sticky Fingers. Continuing the 3 songs they began in Alabama, on the 15th of December, they started on Dead Flowers. The song, a sarcastic message of emptiness due to an uncaring lover. The narrator feels as little for his lover as is shown towards him. He foresees the breakup, and the lady in a pink Cadillac, and the narrator in a basement with a needle and a spoon. It's possibly the most pessimistic song the Stones ever released. Dark lyrics, as often is the case with the group, are set to completely contrasting music. Optimistic country melodies play through the background. Mick later commented he played the song hundreds of times at home before bringing it into the studio. Mick Jagger plays acoustic guitar on the track, doubled by Keith playing his Telecaster. Mick Taylor accompanies them on his Gibson ES-345. At this point, Mick and Marriane are due to attend their court case for cannabis possession on the 19th of December. The case came to very little. Mick was fined £200 and the charges were dropped against Marriane. As 1970 began, mixing commenced for the live album the Stones would release for Decca. Tensions had arose in the band. Keith's ever-growing drug use was annoying Bill Wyman. At this point, Bill had stopped talking to Keith. The silence between the two would continue for much of the 70s. By this point, Keith had become obsessed with concealing his heroin. He bought pens and deodorant cans that had been hollowed out to store the drug. In February, the Stones visited Trident Studios. There they listened to mixes of the live album Get Your Yayas Out and the playback of the 3 songs for their new album. At this point, the Stones were informed when their departure from Alan Klein was finalised, they will be receiving an astronomical tax bill. The solution, as mentioned previously, to leave England and become tax exiles was, as they say, Hobson's choice. Stones were also coming close to finishing their record deal with Decca. There was not a chance they would resign. They were being offered much greater deals by other labels. America's Atlantic Records was the most appealing. They promised no interference or censorship of their work. The problem was, they still owed Decca one more album. They decided to choose a selection of performances from the US tour and release a live album. They quickly titled it Get Your Yayas Out. When Decca reminded the band they still owed them one last single, they decided to write a song titled Cocksucker Blues. The story followed a rent boy and graphically detailed his exploits. No release date was set for the single. As March begins, the Stones continue recording for Sticky Fingers. They were now recording in a mobile studio. It had state-of-the-art equipment built inside a truck. Long cables would connect to their recording space, allowing them to park up outside Mick's house Stargroves. They would run through the actual songs in the halls of Mick's house. The first song they began, titled Bitch, has 2 meanings: the nightmare life of a heroin addict and the nightmare of being in love. The song would be banned from the airwaves. Mick later stated the music had came from a jam between he, Bobby Keys and Charlie Watts. Keith arrived very late for the session, provides the solo, Chuck Berry style riffs, and Mick Taylor adds the rhythm. Next they begin Mick's composition titled I Got the Blues. The story follows a man reminiscing about his time with a woman and how she abandoned him. As the song progresses, he struggles to see how he can go on. The story possibly was inspired by Mick's feelings towards Marriane. Next they begin another morbid song titled Sister Morphine. The story follows a man in hospital from a recent injury. He receives regular shots of morphine and begins to hallucinate. The song ends with the narrator dying from his injuries. Possibly the injuries were a metaphor for emotional pain and the death was caused by an overdose. The music dates back to 1968. Mick had written it while in Rome. For the recording, Keith strums his acoustic hummingbird. Mick Taylor accompanies him on slide guitar. The next song they begin was born from a jam between Charlie and Keith. For Can't You Hear Me Knocking, Keith plays open G on his Les Paul to kick off the song. He's joined by Mick Taylor playing rhythm on his Gibson SG. The song descends into a jam halfway through. Keith later stated, "The jam was improvised and the group didn't know they were still recording. He thought the tape was going to fade off. For the finished product, they had the song and the jam, and both were presented." By June, Ned Kelly was released. Mick despised the film. He hated the way he looked. He hated the way he sounded. He refused to attend the London premiere. The press agreed, and the film was ripped apart by critics. On January 30th, it was official. Alan Klein was dismissed from the Rolling Stones services. Amazingly, Klein was taken back by the decision. This wouldn't be the last of Klein though. In the worst shock of all to the Stones, they now realised Klein owned the copyrights to everything the Stones recorded since 1965. The Stones set off for a European tour, and it was now Marriane decided to leave Mick, this time for good. The 4-year relationship was now over. Despite Mick's pleas, Marriane stood firm and never returned. Mick later said of their time together, "It wasn't me that almost killed Marriane, it was she that nearly killed me." To his credit, Mick didn't ask for the house back he'd bought her mother, and Marriane and her son Nicholas stayed there. Marcia Hunt moved into Shaney Walk, and others noted Mick being in a somber mood. He missed Nicholas. He now felt it was time to have a child of his own. Marcia would soon become pregnant. While in France, Mick meets actress Bianca Perez Mora Marcias. The two will soon begin a relationship. Next song the group begin, titled Sway, was written by Mick. A pessimistic message, possibly inspired by the events at Altamont. The song is one simple statement: society is violent and it always will be. The song is again recorded at Mick's house with a mobile studio outside. In truth, Keith didn't want to be there. This possibly due to his ever-growing heroin addiction. Either way, the song was taken over by the two Micks, Mick Taylor and Mick Jagger. Taylor adds 2 solos, and Mick Jagger plays electric guitar on a Stones record for the very first time. Keith hated Mick's electric guitar playing. He later stated, "It's not my cup of tea, and Mick hasn't got the right touch for electric." Keith did, however, say he likes Mick's acoustic playing. Mick Jagger plays an open G, while Mick Taylor accompanies him on lead with his Gibson Les Paul. On November, Marcia gives birth to Mick's child. Though the two now have a daughter together, their relationship is all but over. The next song they begin, according to Keith, was a Mick composition. Midnight Mile, Keith said, was entirely Mick's work. Mick had come up with the whole idea and the band just figured out how to play it. Mick later said he wrote the song while the band were on tour in the summer of 1970. As for the story, Mick later dismissed rumours the song was about coming down from an all-night cocaine high. He stated it was about the difficulty of touring and his reluctance to do it over again. Musically, Mick stated with the track he wanted to explore different sounds. He'd come up with an Indian-sounding riff on acoustic guitar, played it for Mick Taylor, thinking he had something. Keith doesn't turn up for the session. It was the first time a song was cut without the band's guitarist. Mick Jagger plays the opening riff on acoustic. Keith later stated, "I was very out of it by the end of the album." As 1971 began, the Stones now faced the decision of leaving England. They'd decided on the south of France. It was close enough to England, and it offered both privacy and a relaxed atmosphere. This isn't to say they sold up all their houses. Their residence in the south of France would be seen as their primary home, therefore escaping the British tax system. Keith and Anita's descent into heroin addiction was becoming more serious by the week. Anita unsuccessfully checked into rehab, and while Keith was driving over to visit her, he nodded off in his car and drove straight across a roundabout. He demolished the vehicle and made a run for it before the police arrived. Keith later told the police he'd crashed the car after a Ferrari cut him up. The group's Farewell to England party commenced on March 30th in London's Skindles Hotel. When the music was halted by the hotel due to complaints, Mick threw a table through the room's window. It was a perfect metaphor for their attitude towards the establishment, who both attempted to silence and bankrupt them. The Rolling Stones now set sail for France. Sticky Fingers was released on the 23rd of April 1971. The Stones had now fully embraced their image as not just a rock band, but the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Metallica's guitar playing added a smooth melodic dimension to their arrangements. Let It Bleed had featured themes of disillusionment, betrayal, but also resilience. Songs on Sticky Fingers focused on lust, vulnerability, but mainly addiction. Recording of the first 3 songs at Muscle Shoals had gone down so well, Keith later stated, had they not been derailed by their tax problems, they'd have recorded the whole of Exile on Mainstreet there. The tour at the end of 1969 had marked a new era for the group. Musically, they were riding the quest of a wave. Bustling with energy and creativity, the Rolling Stones were now enjoying their golden years. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel, and if you wish to donate, it would be greatly appreciated. Just click the 3 symbols next to the video, then the thanks icon, and choose however much you wish to donate. Everything donated goes directly back into the channel to make better quality videos. As always, thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next video.